now it's time to talk about the other side of the equation, because you'll notice the last 3 days were really heavily weighted towards talking about the women. And it's actually how a lot of fertility issues work, because there's not a whole lot that Western medicine can do in terms of helping create healthy sperm. So the guys tend to get left out of the equation. Now, in terms of the complexity of treatment, women are actually much more difficult to treat because they have the differing hormones throughout their cycle. But the fact of the matter is that we actually have hormones that can help improve a woman's fertility. It's a little bit harder for the guys, which is one of the reasons why you don't hear a whole lot about male infertility factors. So that's why I wanted to talk about it today. So the first thing to know is that 40 million sperm is considered a normal amount. And that's, however, a number we have for the current times that we are in. If you look back at the 80s and the 70s, actually normal was considered 80 million sperm. So there's been a dramatic drop in sperm numbers and health and quality in the last 30 years or so. And nobody's quite sure why this is. There's a pretty good hunch that endocrine disruptors, which are chemicals in the environment that mimic estrogen and testosterone, actually interfere with the signaling between the brain and the gonads. In the men, gonads are their testicles. In women, gonads are our ovaries. And when that pathway of communication gets disrupted, then what happens is that the receptors in the gonads respond to the endocrine disruptor, which it thinks is a message from the brain. And then actually what winds up happening is they're responding to that message rather than the actual biofeedback loop. And what results is a decrease in the hormones that are secreted, or actually problems in the production of the sperm themselves. So that's very likely one of the signs, or one of the causes of decreased male fertility. One of the other likelihoods is stress. Stress is a huge problem for fertility, because stress, as we discussed on, I'm pretty sure it was Monday, and I think I said something about it on Tuesday too, but stress basically tells the body, this is a terrible time to have a baby. Don't do that, because we just barely have enough resources to keep ourselves alive. We're not going to be able to sustain a pregnancy or a baby. So just shut that fertility thing down until we're in a safe environment. The problem is that as stress hormones go up, and they stay high, because of our lifestyle factors, because of economic issues, the body constantly suppresses fertility. And what results is infertility in men. Another potential factor is testosterone. Now, a lot of men think, well, if I'm low in testosterone and I have low sperm counts, then I should supplement with testosterone. This is absolutely not the case. Because remember, we're talking about the biofeedback loops between the brain and the gonads. And if a man supplements with endogenous, meaning outside testosterone, it basically acts like an endocrine disruptor. And the testosterone that he's taking orally tells the gonads, oh, wait, you guys are producing way too much testosterone. You need to shut that down right now, because that's not good for us. The problem is that it's not actually true. The testosterone that the man is taking as a supplement is decreasing. It isn't doing anything to help sperm production. So those are probably the main factors for what we're seeing as a worldwide, and this is worldwide, this is not just the United States. They've done studies throughout, the Western Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere, and this is worldwide. There is a definite decrease in the amount of sperm that a healthy male is producing. But still, 40 million is enough to get the job done. So one of the questions that I ask a lot of my patients is, it only takes one sperm to fertilize an egg. Why are we starting out with 40 million? Well, that's because there's a winnowing process where the sperm get weeded out and only the healthiest ones make it to the eggs. So there's a series of, it's almost like an obstacle course. There's a series of hurdles that the sperm have to go through. The first one is after ejaculation, they have to actually find the cervix. Now, if you picture the uterus and the ovaries in your mind right now, what happens is that you've got your cervix, and that's the gateway to the uterus. And in front of the cervix, there's actually something called the vaginal vault. And a lot of the sperm actually just hang out in the vaginal vault and never make it to the sperm, because sperm, like men, don't ask for directions. Sorry, little joke there. But the other thing that happens is that if you were with me yesterday when Dr. Bedient was talking about male factors, a lot of the sperm that men make are just normally not that great. They're not shaped right, or they don't swim particularly well, and they're not motile. So what happens is that they're just sort of hanging out in the vaginal vault, and they just never go anywhere. So that winnows it down quite a bit. So those sperm who actually manage to find the cervix and start swimming up it are actually encountering your cervical mucus, your egg white. Now, most women notice that when they are getting close to their cycle, their cervical mucus becomes that stretchy egg white stuff. And it literally looks like egg white, which is why we call it that. And that egg white, however, has two functions. One, it's helping the sperm swim up through the uterus and into the fallopian tubes, and that makes sense. That stretchy, stringy stuff, it's like a string. It's like a lane marker that helps the sperm swim up. But what happens is within the structure of the cervical mucus itself, there's actually a series of holes. So it's not just a string, it's a net. And the ability of the sperm to swim through that net is what makes it so that the sperm that are malformed, they either get caught in the net, much like fish, when a fisherman is fishing and they get stuck in the net, or if they're not fast enough, they can't make it through the net particularly quickly, and they just never, go all the way through, or they poop out. So in addition to being a helper for getting sperm up to the egg, the cervical mucus is also a barrier that helps weed out those sperm that don't do particularly well. So that's the next barrier. So you've got your cervix, you've got the egg white, the cervical mucus, and then you've got that gigantic football field of the uterus, and then also the fallopian tubes. And the reason I say this is that the sperm are really, really tiny. I want you to imagine an Olympic-sized swimming pool. The egg is the size of probably like a beach ball, and the sperm is probably, the size of, relatively speaking, what would be a good analogy? Call it one of those, those kickboards that people do, but take it and cut that down by about, to 10%. So relatively speaking, in terms of the size of the egg and the sperm, the area of the uterus is really, really large, and it's really hard. I mean, they've got to swim that whole distance to get up to the fallopian tubes. So the sperm is swimming and swimming and swimming. And then remember, we've got two actual fallopian tubes, and the sperm have no idea which side actually has the egg, because remember, the egg is only viable for about 24 hours, and what we really want is for the sperm to be waiting up in the wings, really close to where the fallopian tube is to the ovary. So in this area, we want them waiting right in this area, so that when the egg is released, the egg will actually run into them. But your body never, alternates the side it ovulates from, or sometimes in some women, they'll only ovulate from one side. So half the sperm are going to go up the right side, half the sperm are going to go up to the left side, and that cut down your sperm numbers also. So what we know is about, out of that 40 million sperm that a healthy male ejaculates, only about 4,000 make it to the egg in order to be able to try and fertilize it. So that's, I think, if I got my math right, it's like about 1%. So you start with 40 million, you've only got 1% that are healthy enough to make it to the egg. And then of those sperm, one of them hopefully is going to get the golden ticket, and it's the one that gets to penetrate and fertilize the egg. But you can see how, if we're starting with 40 million and then you only wind up with 4,000 at the egg, starting with a lower sperm count actually dramatically decreases the likelihood that you're going to have, the sperm necessary in order to get to the egg and potentially fertilize it. So that's one of the reasons that we have to talk about male fertility. That's why you need 40 million sperm. Now, we spoke yesterday with Dr. Bedian, and one of the things that she had mentioned is it's not just the absolute number, it's also the healthy number of sperm in there. There is always what we'd like to see is 50% of the sperm that have what we call healthy motility, which is they swim really well. If you've got a number, if you've got like 40 million sperm, but they're just not swimming particularly well, that may mean that even though the male has a healthy sperm analysis or count, they're just not getting up to the egg, and that would create a male fertility factor. The other thing is that sometimes they're very slow swimmers. So we also look at the amount, or not just slow swimmers, excuse me, but what's called progressive motility. Some sperm, as Dr. Bedian put it, just do donut holes in the vaginal vault. Some sperm just kind of lose their way. One of the studies that I saw a couple of years ago after marijuana was legalized is that often the sperm of men who smoke a lot of marijuana will literally swim in circles. It does something to their sense of direction or their ability to swim appropriately forward that you wind up with a lot of sperm, but they don't actually have that forward momentum, which means they're never going to make it up to the egg. It's one of the reasons that I tell my patients that they really need to dramatically, if not altogether, stop having their partners or telling their partners that it's okay to smoke marijuana, because for the purpose of having healthy sperm, if the sperm really aren't doing the progressive forward motility thing, trying to conceive naturally gets really tricky. Now, it's less of a problem if your sperm is swimming in donut holes or in circles if you're doing IVF, because there's a procedure whereby they can actually inject the sperm into the egg. But you want your sperm to be as healthy as they should be. And I don't know about you, but I'm thinking that any sperm that's swimming in circles probably or could possibly have other issues with it too. So the object of the exercise is to keep the sperm as healthy as possible. Okay, so what happens then when the sperm gets to the egg? Which one actually, what factors actually help it penetrate? So one of the things that is critical for the biochemical process of having the sperm being actually able to penetrate the egg is calcium. There is in the head of the sperm, there is a little spot, and that little spot actually has calcium stored up in it. And when it gets to the egg, it releases that calcium, and that's what allows it to actually penetrate. So if you've got a guy who doesn't have any doesn't have good sources of calcium, and doesn't eat green leafy vegetables and doesn't eat, because green leafy vegetables are high in calcium. I'm not a big fan of milk, but doesn't do seeds and nuts and more natural sources of calcium. The reason I'm not a fan of milk is because there are inflammatory factors, and that's a whole nother conversation. But if you have a man who is not getting good sources of calcium, even if he's on a prenatal, the problem is that most prenatals for men don't actually have that much calcium in them. Actually, that's true of prenatals for women too. Calcium is an extraordinarily bulky mineral. The main body tissue that it turns into is bone, and you'll notice bone is what makes us as big as we are. So calcium is super bulky, and your prenatal, which is already probably that big anyway, if it had enough calcium in it for the day, it would be that big, and there's no way you could get it down. So one of the things that a lot of women and men do not realize is that you have to supplement with calcium. That's your hot tip for the day. You have to supplement with calcium in order to actually adequately complement and give your body what it needs in order to have the full spectrum of nutrients. So for a man who is calcium deficient, it will make it harder for the sperm to penetrate the egg. Again, that's another male factor issue. So he should be supplementing with calcium if he's not very good about dietary sources of calcium, so that he can actually make it so that his swimmers can do the job once they get to the egg. So that's why you need 40 million, because it goes down to 4,000, and of that 4,000, even if they got there, if you're calcium deficient, if your guy is calcium deficient, they may not be able to penetrate. And all of those things are going to be factors for male infertility. Let's talk about sperm analysis, because I know that women often have a lot of questions. Okay, so Danelle has a question. Oh, there we go. How much calcium are you recommending in general? So men generally don't need quite as much calcium as women do. The RDA for women is like 1,200 milligrams. Generally what I do is I tell my patients to go get a calcium supplement and then just follow what it says on the bottle. You want to make sure that it's a relatively absorbable calcium, and you also want to make sure it's a form that is not going to upset the stomach. So, for example, oyster shell calcium is extremely difficult on the digestive system, and it's also really hard to just absorb. So I don't recommend oyster shell calcium. Plus, oyster shells also often have heavy metals in them, because oysters are bottom feeders, and so heavy metals like mercury and cadmium and all those other nasty things tend to concentrate in the shell. So what I say is, go find like calcium citrate or calcium malttate and just follow what it says on the bottle. You can also look up the RDA online for men and make sure that he's hitting that amount. So does that help? I think, you know, and of course it depends if he has a different disease. You know, men, so there are going to be 2 hot tips that I'm going to give you later, and if I forget, remind me. But one of the things is that men, I just blanked out. Sorry about that. I know one of the things that I was going to say, and if I remember what the other one is, I'll remind you, because I'll remember what it was that I was going to say about calcium in guys, other than the sperm count, in a minute. Okay, so let's talk about sperm analysis. So we already know that what we're looking for on the sperm analysis is 40 million sperm. And when you look at a sperm analysis, it'll give you like the total number, and then it'll tell you the percentage that'll motile, and then often it will tell you the morphology. Now, there are a couple of different standards for looking at morphology, and these, we're not, morphology is actually something that is, controversial in the world of fertility, because we're not actually sure if morphology, which means the shape of the sperm, is an important factor for determining if the sperm are healthy or not. And I know that sounds weird, but the fact of the matter is that if the sperm can swim and if they have forward mobility, then if it's got a kinked tail, we don't really care. There are sperm analyses that can actually go deep into like sperm morphology and tell you, is the problem in the head of the sperm, or is it in the tail of the sperm? And if it's in the head of the sperm, then yes, you probably start worrying about if there's going to be any damage to the DNA. So that's something that you would be concerned about, but that's actually a test that you have to request. So if you ignore the morphology, what you're really focusing on is the number of motile sperm. And you want at least 50% motility, as Dr. Beatty had said yesterday. But you're also looking for that progressive motility, and that we want that number at 15%, because of the ones that are swimming, remember, some of them are going to go in donut holes, whether or not your guy is smoking marijuana. And so as long as 15% are swimming forward pretty well, then yeah, you've got a good chance of getting your 4,000 sperm up to the egg. The other measures that are on a sperm analysis are the amount of fluid. You're looking for at least 1.5 milliliters of fluid. Anything less than that, and your guy's probably dehydrated and needs to drink more, or there's some sort of fluid mechanism issue. And what it means is that the fluid, which actually protects, because in the ejaculate protects the sperm from the acid bath of the uterus, because the uterus is acidic to keep the bacteria in there, the bacteria levels down, but it's not great for the sperm. So the fluid that the sperm are swimming in actually it's a protective coat for the sperm, and they kind of carry a bit of it around like a raincoat as they're swimming up. And if there isn't enough fluid, then a couple things are going to happen. They're not going to be protected, but also if the fluid is sticky and thick, then it's a problem. And that's measured by liquefaction. So you'll notice that liquefaction, the normal rate is usually about 20 minutes. And what that means is that it liquefies, and so that it means that the sperm can start to swim. But if it's gooey and clumpy, and if it takes a long time to liquefy, basically the sperm are stuck in a glue ball, and they can't swim up the way they need to. So you look at the amount of fluid, and then you look at the liquefaction time. Morphology, which is the shape, is generally not considered an important clinical variable. So what that means is we're really ignoring it unless your doc is willing to do the sperm analysis where we can see if the damage is in the head of the sperm. Because for me, that would indicate that, yep, there's some DNA issues happening there, and that would be something that we want to try to address. So that basically are all the factors that are in a sperm analysis. And if any of those factors come back as problematic, then you know that you've got a male factor issue, okay? All right, so let me talk to you about the single biggest problem for men, other than doing things like supplementing with testosterone. And that is heat. So think about what your guy looks like. You'll notice that his gonads, what was the faction word about gooiness? Anonymous Mouseclat, I'm not sure what you mean. Oh, factor? Can you type in a little bit more about what you were asking about to see if I can answer it, because I'm not sure what you're referring to. Okay, and while you're doing that, let's go back to male anatomy. So you'll notice that your guy, his testicles hang outside his body. So remember, your gonads are your ovaries, and they're internal. Men's testicle hang outside, their gonads hang outside their body, and there's a very important biological reason for that. It was okay, so going back to Anonymous Mouseclat's question, it was the word used for sperm analysis after fluid. Liquefaction? Oh, liquefaction. Liquefaction is how fast the sperm goes from the sperm sample goes from being the glue ball to being liquid so that the sperm can swim. Okay, good. Glad we clarified that. So, so testicles hang outside the body because you may have noticed that in general, men run hot. And that heat is a result of the general circulating testosterone that they have. Because testosterone is what gives men bigger bones, is what gives them the stronger muscles. The fact is that heat is really bad for sperm, because heat will both deform the proteins in the sperm shape, but it can also deform the protein in the head of the sperm, also known as DNA. So Mother Nature, by evolution, has realized that if men are going to have testosterone, in order to have sperm that are going to be functional, the gonads have to hang outside the body, and the temperature in the gonads is 1 to 2 degrees cooler than it is in the core temperature of the man. So this is really important. The reason, so what happens is if you have a guy that is constantly running unusually hot, it means his general circulating temperature is going to be hotter than normal, and that blood is going to run through his testicles, and that's going to heat up his testicles. And this is not good, because it's going to lead to more deformed sperm that can't necessarily swim forward, or sperm with damaged DNA. So the count and everything like that might look good, but we don't know how the DNA inside the head of the sperm is doing, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. So if your guy is really into saunas, jacuzzis, really, 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 really hot, long showers, or wearing, clothing that jam those testicles up against his body so they run hot, then he is very likely affecting his sperm count. If you have a guy who has 80 million sperm and he's got heat problems, but he still has 40 million sperm that are doing fine, it's not a problem. But if you have a guy who has, 20 million sperm and they're not swimming really well, and on top of that, he's actually running really hot, and the chances are that the heat are actually contributing to the male factor issues. So that's one of the reasons why having your guy keep his jewels cool is really, really important, and heat is a problem. Now, I live in Las Vegas. Summer is brutal here. Our winters and our fall, or our winter, our fall, and our spring are actually really lovely. But summer is really, really hot. And I have patients whose husbands work in jobs where they're exposed to the heat outside, whether they're airplane mechanics, whether they're FedEx guys, post office guys, whether the guys that are the valets, whatever job, electricians, plumbers, construction workers, or people working on a job site where it's outside. Any of these guys that is that hot, what I generally tell my patients is don't bother during the summer months, because if you're having fertility issues and your guy is working outside, the chances are really high that the DNA is just not going to survive the heat bath that he's exposed to every day. So I tell my patients, take a break. Just, if you want to have sex for fun, have sex for fun, but don't keep putting yourself in that position where you're trying and trying and trying and hoping and hoping and hoping and devastated every time you get your period, because the heat that your guy is exposed to is contributing to the issues with the fertility. So heat is a huge problem in male factor issues, and it's something that you can either manage your schedule around, or you can actually, if he tends to do all those things that I just said, saunas, steam showers, jacuzzis, all those hot things, then, tell him to lay off and give his testicles a chance to actually cool off and not have the problems with the heat. Now, remember on Monday and Tuesday, we talked about it takes 90 days to develop a healthy egg. And I talk about this a lot on my Fertility Reset online.com course, but also if you look at the homepage for fertilityresetonline.com, you'll notice that I talk a lot about that 90-day cycle that it takes to develop a healthy egg. The same is true of sperm. It takes 70 to 90 days for healthy sperm to generate. So just like you, if your guy has been exposed to really, really high heat and high temperatures, then what you need to do is you need to just assume that it's going to take 70 to 90 days for his sperm to regenerate, recalibrate, and get back to being much stronger and healthier with stronger and healthier DNA. And then you can start trying again. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what the heat does, because everybody's cooked steak here, okay? What happens when you take a raw steak and you cook it is that you're actually unwinding the protein in the steak, and that's what gives it that tenderness. It's true of any kind of substance, any protein substance. When you cook it, you unwind the DNA strands, and that's what changes the texture. The whole point of a sperm is to deliver the DNA package to the egg. And the DNA that's in the head of the sperm, just like steak, just like eggs, just like chicken, just like any protein, if it gets heated too high, what happens is it's going to start degrading the DNA. There is a test called the sperm DNA fragmentation test, and it is not offered in many urologists' offices, and there are some reproductive endocrinologists that offer it. You will actually have to check with your lab and with your doctor. But what the sperm DNA fragmentation test can tell us is a little bit about, what's going on with the DNA. And if it's broken, if it's not in those shapes that we need it to, then that's going to tell you that, yeah, that package is not actually, even if the sperm gets up to the egg, isn't going to do a great job. The DNA is not intact enough to help or to combine with the egg and create a viable embryo. And heat is one of the factors that can contribute to the sperm DNA fragmentation. So if you do nothing else for your guy, other than tell him you really need to cool things off, and you need to make sure that you're, not doing steam showers, saunas, jacuzzis, and not staying outside for hours and hours on end. Or if he can't avoid it and has to go outside hours and hours on end when it's because of his job, then you need to think about the timing in terms of when you want to try and get pregnant. Because trying when he's been exposed to that kind of heat is going to add on to the fertility issues that y'all are experiencing. So that's why heat is a huge problem. Now, let's talk a little bit about Clomid, and then I want to talk about vasectomies too. Clomid, so for men who have low sperm count, they just don't have the 20 million that the reproductive endocrinologist wants, or whatever number, it's just not close to normal. The interesting thing about our biochemistry is that we have, as women, progesterone, estrogen, and we have a little bit of testosterone. And testosterone, we have it in small amounts, and that's what actually brings our eggs up out of the hibernation that they're in our ovaries, and allows them to start that developmental process that 90 days later will result in a follicle. Men also have estrogen and testosterone. And estrogen is important for men the way it's important for women. The testosterone is important for women in that that's actually what helps the germ cells in the testicles to start generating sperm. So one of the clever things that a reproductive endocrinologist can do to potentially help with a sperm count problem is they will put men on Clomid, which at first blush seems just really, really weird, because Clomid is one of the medications that doctors use to try and help women, improve their egg quality and ovulate. But it has the same effect on sperm. What it does is it helps the estrogen that may not be sufficient in the testicles to actually help start that whole process of creating the sperm. So often what a reproductive endocrinologist will do if they've got a man who's got a low sperm count is put them on Clomid to see if it will make a difference. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, but it's always worth a try. So that's why your guy may be on Clomid, or your friend's husband might be on Clomid. And just like anything in this process, it takes 90 days. So a guy has to be on Clomid for anywhere from 70 to 90 days to see if it's going to make a difference or not. And unlike women, where when you're doing your basal body hormone charting, we can actually tell what's going on, men are a black box. Basically, we do the treatments, and then 90 days later, hang on just a second, I'll answer that question in a minute. 90 days later, we have them do another sperm analysis. And unlike women, there's no way to track what happens in between. So that's why the guy has to be on Clomid for like 70 to 90 days. Before he can do the sperm analysis and see what has happened in the sperm count. Okay, so Face Yoga with Eva is asking about what about dead sperm and leukocytes? Can you explain a little bit more about what you're asking about, Eva? I suspect what you're asking is if you've got dead sperm and then a lot of leukocytes in the sperm analysis. So let's hang on and see if that's what Eva's asking about. I'm going to answer the question. Okay, so leukocytes are white blood cells. And if your guy, and you're right, I only talked about normal sperm analysis. I didn't talk about abnormal sperm analysis, so thank you for bringing that up. So if your guy does a sperm analysis and it turns out that he's got leukocytes in the sperm, what it means, or in the ejaculate, what it means is there's some sort of infection going on. Whether or not there's a link between the leukocytes that and they attack the dead sperm, or they're attacking the sperm and killing them off, or if there's a sign of an underlying infection of some sort, needs more than just a sperm analysis to figure out. That's why often you will wind up with your guy will also have to do, okay, so Eva says the sperm analysis came back with dead sperm and leukocytes. There is a percentage of mobility though. Okay, so the question is there some sort of underlying infection? And that's where blood work comes in. First thing we need to establish is what is his white blood cells in his body, because if he's got an unknown infection somewhere, that can raise the leukocyte count in the blood as well as in the sperm, and that infection needs to be addressed. So whether it's a UTI or whether it's an infection somewhere else in the body, you need to go back and do regular blood work and see if there's something that's off. Not all of this, and I will tell you, I don't know, because I have never seen it. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I don't know if there's any sort of research that says that sometimes the dead leukocytes, or the leukocytes can be attacking the sperm, and there's like some sort of autoimmune issue going on. But that might be something else that you would want to look at, because if there's no sign of infection anywhere else, then the question becomes, is there something going on? Now, when there has been a vasectomy reversal, so this is the kind of case, and this actually, I was going to talk about vasectomy, so I'm going to go here. And I don't know if this applies to what Eva is asking about, but in case it does, I'm going to go there. When a man has had a vasectomy for less than 5 years, reversal is generally successful. And, you have to do the reversal and then wait 70 to 90 days and do another sperm analysis and see if the sperm are getting through. When the vasectomy happened more than 5 years ago, what we find is that there is the creation of something in the testicles called anti-sperm antibodies. And basically, sperm are supposed to leave the body. They're not supposed to stay there. And just because the man has had a vasectomy doesn't mean that he's not continuing to create sperm. It just means that the vas deferens, which is the tube, I think it's the vas deferens that they crimp. But anyway, the tube that they crimped so that the sperm can no longer come out, the sperm is still being generated in the testicles. And often the body will start to attack the sperm. So that even if you do a sperm, a vasectomy reversal, the result is that the sperm will be attacked by the body and it will create inflammation and you'll see dead sperm. So in the case of a vasectomy reversal, that might be part of what's going on. It just depends on the specific history of the man, and that's why you need to do some more investigation in terms of blood work to see if there's systemic infection. Oh, one of the other things that shows up often is like sinus infections. Because sinus infections, you can have a low-grade sinus infection and not have a lot of signs and symptoms that will show up in the blood work. And then you also want to check for a UTI. So Eva is also asking, what about testicular scar tissue? So, in terms of the leukocytes and dead sperm and possibly anti-sperm antibodies, so testicular scar tissue, if a man, so one of the things that can contribute to problems with male fertility is if he has had any kind of abdominal surgery, and this is not just a vasectomy, although that can create scar tissue, but abdominal surgery, we worry about the buildup of scar tissue down in that area. So if he's had a appendectomy, or if he had a hernia repair, or if he had, for example, undescended testicle when he was a kid, and so there were, you know, some sort of issues around there. But scar tissue can do a few things. It can actually impede blood flow down to the testicles and make it so that they're not getting the nutrients that they need. It can also, you know, just actually impede how the gonads are working, because if it's getting, you know, scar tissue has a tendency to not just be in the area where the surgery was, it can actually be in other areas too. It can impair the testicles' abilities, I guess, to create the sperm, because the tissue is actually not allowing things to happen. Whether or not that's then going to also have an effect on like leukocytes and dead sperm, I don't know. That's the kind of thing that you need to investigate with a reproductive endocrinologist, because it's a question of whether or not you know, the anti-sperm antibodies are in play. But that's one of the reasons that it's really important for you to know if there was a vasectomy reversal, how far before it was. Because the other thing is that the vasectomy creates scar tissue. The reversal will create scar tissue. And it could be that nothing's coming through because the scar tissue itself from the reversal is actually blocking the tube. And I've had patients where that was the case. And in that particular situation, the only way around it is to do a withdrawal of the sperm from the testicles, and then either do an IUI or an IVF. And usually reproductive endocrinologists will want to do IVF in that case, just because, you know, they want to maximize the likelihood that the sperm are going to be able to do what they need to do. Hold on, I just had a thought. Scar tissue. Oh, here's the thing. The tubes, the seminiferous tubules, which is where the sperm are being created and matured, there's 6 feet of tube coiled up in the testicles, and they're very, very, very thin tubes. If you were with us yesterday, Dr. Bedian talked about the fact that in a woman, the tube, let's see, I can't get my pen to do it. The tube is about the width of, a fallopian tube is about the width of a pen on the inside area, and the width of the insert for the pen, that really skinny thing, that's about the functional capacity. It's much, much thinner for a seminiferous tubule. So the thing is that even the tiniest spot of scar tissue can block it off. And the problem is that it's not like a doc can go in there and you know, try and thread through 6 feet of tube to open up a scar tissue blockage. It's not the same as massive scar tissue on the body, where sometimes they can go back in and do cosmetic surgery to relieve the scar tissue. We're talking tiny, tiny, tiny microscopic tubes and, you know, microscopic sperm, and the problem is that trying to clear scar tissue out in that area is going to be very, very difficult. The other thing is that this is very delicate mechanisms and very delicate tissue. If you have scar tissue in the testicles, going in and cleaning it out is just as likely to actually wind up having the tube tear or break somewhere in that. So that's why often doctors will resort to going in and actually like extracting the sperm from the testicle for a procedure like IUI and IVF, because that way they aren't going to risk actually damaging the testicles any more than that. Okay, so these are great questions. Thank you. So we talked about vasectomies and the issue. Now, if it's within 5 years, you're less likely to have the anti-sperm antibody issue. Scar tissue can always be a problem, but it's less likely to happen because it hasn't been sitting there that long. We talked about DNA and the effect of heat on the DNA. And heat is the number one thing that I want everybody to take away from this, that heat is just bad. Heat bad for testicles. And we talked about sperm analysis and what a normal sperm analysis is. And Eva had a great question about, some abnormal sperm analysis. Oh, that's the other thing that I wanted to talk about with vasectomies. Okay, so you guys had a vasectomy, and I've had both men and women kind of ask me, so how come stuff still comes out when a man ejaculates if he's had a vasectomy? And the reason is, there's actually, ejaculate is the combination of two systems. One of them is the tubules that carry the sperm. The other one is the fluid that the body provides for the sperm, and then what winds up in ejaculate is both of those, they combine at one point in the system, and that's what the guy ejaculates. So even if a man has had a vasectomy, he's still going to ejaculate the fluid because that doesn't change. But it's the other reason that when your guy has had a vasectomy and also a vasectomy reversal, they tell you you absolutely have to use birth control for that time until they can do a sperm analysis and make sure that he's actually producing sperm, or in the case of a vasectomy to stop sperm, to make sure that he's shooting basically blanks. There's nothing in there because the fluid's always going to be there. The fluid is not an indicator of whether a man has sperm issues or not. And I want to make that really, really clear, because the fluid system is really simple, and it's actually at the very, very end of the process with where sperm are created. So just because there's fluid doesn't mean that there's not a sperm issue, but it doesn't mean that there is a sperm issue. So that covers pretty much everything that I wanted to talk to you about. And then so the two hot tips that I wanted to do was calcium is really important to supplement for your guy, just to make sure that the sperm can actually penetrate the egg, and heat is bad. So it's 1:48, and if nobody else has any questions, that's it for me. I'm also happy to open it up to any other questions that you might have about fertility. And while hopefully somebody's furiously typing away to give me a question, I'm just going to remind everybody that tomorrow I'll be talking with Mei Li Shaw, who is a therapist specializing in couples who have infertility issues. And we're going to talk about some of the effects that emotions can have on the process of fertility issues, but also some of the emotional issues that can come up with fertility, because that is important. Okay, so Anonymous Mouseplat says, have you heard about using HCG to help sperm? I do know that it's used. I do not know that much about it. It's not anything that I've taken a class on or I've read a whole lot about. Unfortunately, I can't answer that question. Face Yoga with Eva asked, what about zinc for men? Absolutely. Now, if you're on a good male prenatal, and there are several on the market, FH Pro, and Neurologics has some, and then Fertilate for Men, they usually have zinc in them. Zinc is critical. There is an amazing video on YouTube, and if I remember, I'll try and post it, hold on, in Instagram, where they filmed the actual moment of conception, and there's a green flash when the sperm penetrates the egg. That green flash is brought to you by zinc. So if your guy is zinc deficient, again, it's one of the factors that will prevent the fertilization of the sperm or the egg by the sperm. The reason I didn't specifically bring it up, Eva, is that most men's vitamins and prenatal vitamins have zinc in them. You have to be careful with zinc supplementation, because if you have an overabundance of zinc, it will actually deplete copper. The other thing is that zinc can actually upset your stomach. So it's one of those things where if your guy is taking a prenatal and there's zinc in it, Unless there's actual evidence that he has reduced sperm count, I probably wouldn't supplement, just because we don't want to invite in the other mineral imbalances that can cause. And, you know, nobody likes having an upset stomach. But if he's not supplementing with anything, then putting him on a good prenatal should actually help. And like I said, I'll try and put the link to that video up, because it's remarkable. It's amazing. It looks like fireworks, because they actually put together a whole bunch of eggs that were fertilizing, and it's the green fireworks. Anonymous Mouseplat asks, also, if a guy does a serum calcium blood test and it's normal, does that mean he has enough calcium? Probably. You know, there's always, just like there's a blood-brain barrier, there's a blood-sperm barrier, and it doesn't always mean that things are crossing the barrier, but I would say that if he has, you know, a decent serum blood calcium test, he's probably fine. That was the hot tip. Thank you for asking. Okay, so here's the thing. The other thing you need to get your guy to stop doing is soda. There has been a dramatic increase in osteoporosis for men, and the reason for it is soda. Soda is extremely acidic, and the acidity of soda means, because your body has to maintain a specific pH balance, what your body does is it actually draws on the basic stores of calcium and magnesium to buffer out the acidity of soda. So what happens is to maintain that pH balance, your guy's going to lose bone mass. So if he's drinking a huge amount of soda, the problem is he's basically demineralizing his bones. And as always, fertility, if you go back and look at my my posts, Eva, who I actually talked to on Monday, was so kind as to post my fertility pyramid. And you'll notice that fertility is at the top of the health pyramid. It takes a lot of resources to create fertility. So if your guy's body is having to decide between funding calcium for the sperm and trying to buffer the pH that the pH imbalance that he's creating from the acidity of the soda, the pH balance always wins, because if your pH is not in balance, it'll actually affect the functioning of billions of the biochemical reactions that you have going on in your body. So sperm lose. So if your guy is drinking a whole lot of soda, cut it out, because he's demineralizing his bones and setting himself up for osteoporosis when he's 50 or 60. And testosterone is not as protective against that the acidity that the soda creates as we'd like it to be. Plus, most guys don't get enough calcium. So if he's drinking soda, make him stop it. And in that case, I would actually say, despite whatever the blood serum test says, have him take calcium, because if the calcium's in the serum, it's not telling us how his bones are doing. And the kinds of bone problems that show up as a result of constant demineralization, unless you do something like a DEXA scan or something like that, it's not going to show up. So have him eat calcium-rich foods, have him take some calcium supplements, and tell him to get off the soda, and that should take care of it. Okay, so we're at 154, 155. Any other questions? No. So go back and look at the fertility pyramid. I'll try and post the link to the zinc video, and hopefully I'll see everybody tomorrow when I'm talking to Mei Li about fertility and emotional concerns. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me. It's been a fabulous discussion, and have a great day or evening, depending on where you are. Bye-bye.